Hey guys, tonight we are packing our bags and heading out to the American Wild West. And when I say we, I really mean you. We'll be staying right here, in the relative comfort and safety of the 21st century, with my indoor plumbing and my distinct lack of cholera. You, on the other hand, well, let's just say you're going to need a lot more than luck to get through this. We're going to peel back the romantic Hollywood veneer and look at the gritty, uncomfortable, and frankly, deadly reality of it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm always curious to see where you're all listening from, so if you feel like it, drop your city and the time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room is small. The air is thick with the faint, lingering smell of coal smoke and boiled cabbage from yesterday's dinner. Outside, the familiar sounds of your eastern city, the clatter of horse-drawn carts on cobblestone, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, are sounds you're trying to burn into your memory, because tomorrow they'll be gone. You're leaving, not for a holiday, not for a short trip. You are liquidating your entire existence and betting it all on a single, desperate idea. West, in front of you is a small, worn wooden rut. This is it. This is everything you can take. What do you even pack for a place you've only ever heard about in exaggerated letters and suspiciously optimistic pamphlets? You carefully fold a heavy wool blanket. That seems practical. A couple of changes of sturdy clothes. Your father's old picnic, a tin plate, a cup. Then you pause. You look at the small, porcelain shepherdess figurine on the mantelpiece, a wedding gift from your mother. It's useless, heavy, and will probably break on the first bump in the road. You pack it anyway. It's a tiny piece of a life you're about to lose forever. This decision to leave was born from a love adventure. That's a story people tell later. For you, and for thousands like you in the mid-19th century, this is an act of sheer desperation. Maybe you're a farmer whose land has gone fallow, or a clerk who lost his job after the bank collapsed during one of the nation's frequent financial panics. Like the big one in 1837 that crippled the country for years, the letters from out west whisper of free land, of gold, of a chance to start over, a clean slate. The government's promises, like the Homestead Act, sound like a guaranteed ticket to a new life, land of your own. All you have to do is get there and survive. Simple. Right, you've read the guidebooks, of course. Little paperboard books that promise to have all the answers. They confidently list what you need. 100 pounds of flour per person, bacon, coffee, salt, and so on. But they also offer some truly terrible advice. One popular guidebook might suggest a shortcut through a mountain pass that turns out to be nearly impassable, adding weeks to your journey. Historians still find these guides fascinating because they represent the strange mix of solid information and dangerous fantasy that people were working with. You, holding one in your hand, trust it completely. You've even packed an extra sack of beans and less water, because one chapter insisted there would be abundant rivers along the way. A fatal miscalculation, but you won't know that for months. Here's a little detail you haven't considered: the weight. Your wagon, which you've likely purchased sight unseen, can only handle so much. Every single item has to be weighed against its usefulness. That heavy rocking chair your wife insisted on bringing, it will be abandoned on the side of the trail in Nebraska, joining a sad collection of discarded dressers, iron stoves, and family portraits. The trail would become a miles-long museum of broken dreams. But right now, in the quiet of your room, that seems impossible. The real question, the one that keeps you up at night, is whether you're making a huge mistake. Historians still debate the true mindset of the pioneers. Were they courageous visionaries building a new nation? Or were they simply ill-informed refugees, pushed out by economic hardship and pulled in by what was essentially 19th century marketing propaganda? Looking around your small, cramped room at the life you know, the answer feels uncomfortably like a bit of both. You feel the pull of hope, but it's tangled with the cold grip of fear. You are not an adventurer. You are a gambler, and you've just pushed your entire life savings and your family's future onto the table. The last thing you do is check your money pouch. A few coins, carefully saved. It feels like a fortune, but you have no real concept of how quickly it will disappear. A ferry crossing, an overpriced bag of flour at a frontier outpost, a replacement axle for your wagon. It will bleed away faster than you can imagine. You take one last look out the window. The gas lights cast a soft, familiar glow on the street below. It's safe, it's known, and you're about to trade it all for a vast, empty wilderness that doesn't care if you live or die. You blow out the candle, and the room plunges into darkness. The journey hasn't even begun, but you already feel a profound sense of loss. Tomorrow morning, a new life begins, or, at least, something does. The sun isn't even up yet, but a pale, gray light seeps through the window, signaling that it's time. The air is cold, and you can see your breath as you haul your small trunk down the narrow staircase. And then you see it, waiting for you in the Perdon glow. Your wagon. Your home for the next 6 months. Let's be clear, this is not the majestic, boat-sized Conestoga wagon you've seen in drawings. Those were for hauling freight. You, my friend, have what was known as a prairie schooner. It's smaller, lighter, and frankly, looks alarmingly flimsy. It's essentially a farm wagon with a canvas cover stretched over a series of wooden hoops. The canvas has been treated with linseed oil to waterproof it, a process that gives it a strange, slightly rancid smell that will become the permanent scent of your life. This wagon, which you likely bought for a small fortune in a jumping-off town like Independence, Missouri, is already showing signs of a hard life. The wood is splintered in places, and one of the wheels has a slight, ominous wobble. You were probably sold this wagon by a fast-talking man who assured you it was prairie-tested. Historians still debate just how much of the equipment failure on the trail was due to pioneers' ignorance versus how much was outright fraud by merchants in these frontier towns. Were they just savvy businessmen, or were they knowingly sending families out into the wilderness with shoddy gear? You, unfortunately, are the test case. Now, for your first disappointment of the day, you imagine climbing aboard, finding a comfortable spot on a sack of flour, and watching the landscape roll by. And sorry, but that's not happening. No one rides in the wagon if they can help it. It's far too valuable a space, and far too rough a ride. The wagon is for supplies. The sick, the injured, and maybe the very young get to ride. You what? You will walk beside this wagon for over 2,000 miles. Your sturdy new boots will be worn to shreds. Your feet will blister, bleed, and then harden into something you no longer recognize. You heave your trunk into the back, wedging it between a barrel of salted pork and several large sacks of flour. The space is already impossibly cramped. Imagine a modern-day minivan. Take out the seats, and then cram it with enough non-perishable food for half a year, plus tools, cooking equipment, bedding, and that useless porcelain figurine you couldn't bear to leave behind. The inside is a dark, jumbled cavern of essentials. There's no organization, just a frantic Tetris-like puzzle of survival. If you need something from the bottom, you have to unpack half the wagon on the side of the trail to get to it. Now let's talk about the sound. The axles of your wagon are not fitted with ball bearings. They are wood grinding against wood, or maybe wood against an iron hub. To keep them from catching fire from the friction, you need to grease them constantly. The lubricant of choice, a foul-smelling concoction of pine or undeniable fat, sometimes cold dog's butter. This stuff gets everywhere. It's sticky, it stinks, and if you run out, the sound your wagon makes is a high-pitched, soul-destroying screech that can be heard for miles. It's the official soundtrack of your journey. Here's a fun little fact you'll learn the hard way. The wagon bed is not waterproof from the bottom. When you cross a river well, get to that particular terra later water will seep in from below. Any sacks of flour, sugar, or coffee stored on the floor will be ruined. Experienced travelers knew to build a false floor, or at least place everything on wooden slats. But this is your first time. You'll learn this lesson at the cost of your precious coffee supply. Your oxen are hitched up. These creatures are the true engines of your journey. They are slow, stubborn, but incredibly strong and resilient. Unlike horses, they can survive on the poor grasses of the prairie. You don't know their names yet, but you will soon develop a deep, complicated relationship with them. A mix of affection, frustration, and absolute dependency. Your survival rests on their broad, bony shoulders. The wagon master gives the signal. Someone cracks a whip, not at the animals, but in the air, creating a loud puff. Your oxen lean into their yokes. The wagon groans, lurches, and with a sickening squeak from that one wobbly wheel, it begins to move. You take your place alongside it, your hands resting on the rough canvas. You take one last look back at the town, now just a collection of dark shapes against the brightening sky. There is no turning back. The gentle rocking you imagined is a jarring, bone-shaking reality. Every rock and rut in the road travels up through the wheels and into the very frame of your new, miserable home. The squeaking has already started, a rhythmic, grating noise that will follow you all the way to Oregon, or to your grave, whichever comes first. The first few days on the trail are a chaotic, muddy mess. The spring rains have turned the path leading out of town into a deep, rutted quagmire. Your wagon, which seemed so solid just a few days ago, is now your mortal enemy. It gets stuck, constantly. You and your fellow travelers spend more time with your shoulders pressed against the muddy wheels, shouting at your exhausted oxen, than you do actually moving forward. The air is filled with the smell of wet earth, strained animals, and human sweat. This isn't the grand adventure you picture. It's just work. Hard, demoralizing work. But there's a far more insidious threat than the mud, and it's something you won't even see coming. It's the water. After a long day of pushing and pulling, you arrive at a designated campsite near a sluggish, brown river. You are desperately thirsty. You scoop up the water with your tin cup and drink it down without a second thought. It tastes a little salty, but it's wet, and that's all that matters. You use the same water to make coffee and to boil your evening meal of bacon and hardtack. You've just made a potentially fatal mistake. You see, the concept of germ theory is still decades away. No one understands that invisible things in the water can kill you. To you, water is either clean-looking or dirty-looking. This water looks fine, but what you don't know is that the large wagon that camped here 2 nights ago used this very spot as their latrine. Their animals drank from it, and a few of their members were already suffering from a stomach ailment they blamed on bad food. The water is teeming with bacteria, most notably the comma-shaped Vibrio cholerae. Cholera. It was the 19th century as boogeyman, a true plague that swept across continents, and the wagon rails were the perfect incubator for it. Historians call it the unseen outlaw of the West, far more deadly than any gunfire. While people feared raids or rattlesnakes, their real enemy was hiding in their water barrel. The disease could strike with terrifying speed. One day you're perfectly healthy, and the next, you're in the throes of a violent illness. That night, or maybe the next, it starts, a rumbling in your gut. Then come the cramps, sudden and severe, doubling you over in pain. Then the diarrhea begins. It's not a normal sickness. It's relentless and watery, soon nicknamed rice water stool for its appearance. Your body is trying to flush out the bacteria, but in doing so, it's flushing out every last drop of fluid you have. You start vomiting. You can't keep anything down, not even a sip of water. Within hours, you are severely dehydrated. Your skin becomes loose and papery. Your eyes sink back into your skull, and your muscles cramp from the loss of electrolytes. Your thirst is all-consuming, a burning, agonizing craving for water. But any water you drink comes right back up. Your family watches, helpless. They might try to give you some laudanum, a tincture of opium, which was a common cure-all. It might dull the pain, but it does nothing to stop the dehydration that is actively killing you. There is no concept of rehydration therapy, no understanding that you need to replace the lost salts and fluids. It's a sad, strange bit of trivia that one of the most effective treatments for cholera, a simple solution of salt, sugar, and water was a complete medical mystery at the time. As you lie in the back of the jolting wagon, a tiny, miserable space that now stinks of sickness, you are a ghost before you're even dead. The healthy members of the party start to avoid you. Fear is a powerful force, and while they don't understand how the disease spreads, they know it does spread. It jumps from person to person, from wagon to wagon. Soon, others in your group start to fall ill. The nightly campfire, once a place of weary camaraderie, becomes quiet and fearful. People eye each other with suspicion. Every cough, every complaint of a stomachache sends a ripple of panic through the camp. Historians still debate the exact mortality rates on the trail, as records were so poor, but it's estimated that disease, particularly cholera, was the #1 killer. Some wagon trains lost up to a third of their people before they even reached the Rocky Mountains. You may not even get a proper burial. If you die, your family will likely wrap you in a blanket and bury you in a shallow grave on the side of the trail. They'll try to disguise the grave, maybe by running the wagons over it. To protect it from being dug up by wolves, there will be a brief prayer, some tears, and then the wagon train will move on. It has to. The West has no time for mourning. It has a schedule to keep, and you, who dreamed of a new life, have become just another unmarked mound of dirt on the vast and indifferent prairie. Let's say you somehow managed to dodge the cholera bullet. You were lucky. Or maybe you just have a constitution of iron. But now, a few weeks into the journey, you wake up with a splitting headache and a fever that makes your teeth chatter. Even in the morning heat, you're sick. Not cholera sick, thank heavens, but sick nonetheless. Maybe it's a lung infection from breathing in the costume dust. Or perhaps a simple wound on your hand has become red, swollen, and hot to the touch. In your world, this is a minor inconvenience. In the mid-19th century, it's a potential death sentence. So, what do? You go see the doctor. I'm using the term doctor very loosely here. In your wagon train, there might be one man who claims to have some medical knowledge. Maybe he was an apothecary's assistant for a few months. Or perhaps he just owns a dog-eared copy of a book like Gunn's Domestic Medicine, a popular home remedy guide of the era. HES not a trained physician. HES just the one person willing to step up, and his confidence is both reassuring and terrifying. You approach him after the wagons have circled up for the evening. You show him your hand, which is now throbbing with a steady, painful rhythm. He peers at it, stroking his beard thoughtfully. His examination consists of poking the wound, which makes you yelp, and asking if you've had any irregular humors. Medical theory at the time was still heavily influenced by the ancient idea of the four humors: blood, yellow bile, and black bile. Sickness was believed to be caused by an imbalance of these fluids. Therefore, the cure was to rebalance them. This sounds logical. In a weird, ancient Greeks had some idea sort of way. The execution, however, is where things get messy. His first course of action will almost certainly be to bleed you. He'll pull out a small, terrifying-looking instrument called a lancet, or, if HES fancy, a scarificador, a brass box with multiple little blades that spring out. He'll make a cut in your arm and drain a certain amount of blood into a small bowl. The theory is that this will release the bad blood or the excess humor that's causing your fear. In reality, it's just weakening you, making it harder for your body to fight the actual infection. You feel dizzy and even worse than before, but he assures you this is a sign that the treatment is working. Next, he might give you a purgative, something to make you violently empty your bowels. The go-to medicine for this was often calomel, which is mercurous chloride. Yes, mercury. You are being poisoned in an attempt to cure you. You'll spend the rest of the night in misery, feeling even more dehydrated and weak. The doctor might also give you a dose of tartar emetic, a compound of antimony, to make you vomit. The goal is to purge the sickness from your body from all possible exits. Historical medical texts are full of these heroic and frankly brutal treatments. What is still debated by some medical historians is whether these doctors truly believe these methods work, or if they were just performing a kind of medical theater to give their patients a sense of being cared for. Let's talk about that infected hand. The doctor looks at the red streaks now traveling up your arm. He knows this is bad. He calls it blood poisoning. He doesn't have antibiotics. Of course, those are a century away. His solution might be a poultice. How mixed together a strange paste may be of bread and milk, or chewed tobacco, or even cow dung. A surprisingly common folk remedy, and slap it onto your wound. This is supposed to draw out the poison. What it's actually doing is creating a warm, moist, and wonderfully nutritious environment for the bacteria to multiply even faster. One of the most bizarre and fascinating little tidbits from this era of medicine is the weapon salve. This was a form of sympathetic magic. The belief was that you shouldn't treat the wound itself, but the weapon that caused it. So, if you were cut by a knife, the salve would be applied to the knife, and the wound would magically heal. It sounds insane, but in a weird way, it was probably more effective than a dung poultice, because it at least left the wound alone to heal on its own. Days pass. The bleeding and purging have left you weak and anemic. Your hand is now a swollen, discolored mess, and the infection is spreading through your system. You are delirious with fever. Your family watches, their faces etched with worry. They paid the doctor with a sack of sugar, a precious commodity. He did everything he knew how to do, but in his well-intentioned ignorance, he has only hastened your decline. You are dying, not from a dramatic gunshot wound, but from a simple scratch, attended by the best medical care available, as you drift in and out of consciousness in the back of the wagon. The last thing you hear is the rhythmic, grating squeak of the axle, a sound that has become the metronome marking the final beats of your life. You've survived the mud, the cholera scare, and the questionable medical advice. You're starting to feel like a seasoned traveler. The prairie stretches out before you, a vast, rolling sea of grass. The daily routine is monotonous but manageable. You walk, you grease the axles, you choke down your dinner of bacon and beans. You sleep, you're getting tougher, but the landscape is changing. The flatlands are giving way to deeper valleys and more rugged terrain, and that means you're about to face one of the trail's most notorious and nerve-wracking challenges. A river crossing. From a distance, the river looks beautiful, a shimmering ribbon of blue cutting through the green and gold of the plains. It looks peaceful, refreshing. This initial impression is a dangerous lie. Up close, you see the reality. The river is wider than you thought, and the current is deceptively strong, creating swirling eddies and whirlpools. The banks are steep and muddy, churned into a slimy mess by the wagon rains that have passed before you. There's no bridge. There's no ferry. Not out here. There's only you, your flimsy wagon, and a whole lot of fast-moving water. The wagon master calls a halt. The leaders of the different family groups gather to form a plan. This is a moment of pure, unadulterated democracy in action, and it's often chaotic. One man insists the best place to cross is 100 yards upstream where it looks shallower. Another argues that the current is weaker downstream. A third, an old trapper who claims to have crossed this river a dozen times, just spits tobacco juice and grumbles that they're all fools. The debate can go on for hours, fraying nerves and wasting precious daylight. Eventually, a spot is chosen. Now comes the hard part. The wagons have to be prepared. You empty out some of the heaviest items to lighten the load, piling your precious supplies on the muddy bank and hoping a sudden rainstorm doesn't sweep through. You are instructed to raise your wagon bed. This is done by wedging blocks of wood between the wagon box and the running gear. The goal is to lift it just high enough to keep the water from flooding and underpinning everything. It's a precarious, wobbly setup that makes the wagon even more unstable. You watch as the first few wagons attempt the crossing. It's a heart-stopping spectacle. The men shout, whips crack, and the oxen, terrified of the water, bellow in protest. They are forced down the slit, muddy banked into the river. The water immediately rises to the wagon bed. The current catches the wagon, trying to sweep it downstream. It's a brutal tug-of-war between the strength of the oxen and the power of the river. Sometimes it works. The wagon lurches and sways, teetering on the verge of capsizing. But the oxen find their footing on the rocky riverbed and manage to pull it to the other side, dripping and triumphant. But often, it goes wrong. A wheel might hit a submerged boulder, snapping an axle with a sharp crack. The wagon, crippled and helpless, is immediately at the mercy of the current, or an ox might lose its footing, dragging its partner and the entire wagon into a deep channel. The panicked screams of the animals are a sound you will never forget. Here's a small, chilling detail. Drowning was one of the most common causes of death on the trail, especially for women and children, while the men were often stronger swimmers and occupied with managing the animals and wagons. Women, weighed down by their heavy skirts, and children, who might have been riding in the wagon, were incredibly vulnerable. By wagon tips, a child is swept from their mother's arms, and in the chaos, they are gone in an instant. The river doesn't care about your dreams of a new life. Now, it's your turn. Your heart is pounding in your chest. You guide your terrified oxen down the bank. The cold water shocks your legs as you wade in beside them, your hands gripping the side of the wagon. The current is a physical force, pushing against you, trying to knock you off your feet. The river bottom is a treacherous landscape of slippery rocks and sudden drop-offs. Your wagon groans under the strain. You hear that porcelain shepherdess's figurine you packed so carefully clatter against the side of your trunk. You pray. You shout encouragement to your animals, your voice hoarse with fear. Historians are still trying to piece together the exact locations of some of the most dangerous crossings, using pioneer diaries and geographical surveys. Some rivers, like the Prairie, were famously wide but shallow, a mile widened an inch deep. As the saying went, but its shifting sandbars could trap a wagon in seconds. Others, like the Green River, were deep, corrode, and dangerously swift. The choice of where and when to cross was often the most important decision the wagon train would make. A bad choice could lead to disaster. You are halfway across. The water is up to your chest. Your oxen are straining, their eyes wide with panic. The wagon lurches violently as a wheel dips into a hole. For a terrifying second, you think this is it. The wagon tilts, and water sloshes over the edge of the bed. But then, with one last, desperate pull, the oxen find solid ground. They scramble up the far bank, dragging the wagon out of the water's greedy grasp. You collapse on the muddy shore, exhausted, soaked, and trembling. You made it. Your supplies are mostly dry. Your wagon is intact. But as you look back across the river, you see another family isn't so lucky. Their wagon is wide, its white canvas cover submerged like a dying swan, their worldly possessions washing away in the relentless current. You watch in silence, a cold knot of survivor's guilt tightening in your stomach. This is the West. It gives with one hand and takes with the other, all in the space of a single afternoon. After the harrowing experience of the river crossing, you might be looking forward to a bit of that classic cowboy life you've heard so much about. The open range, the trusty horse, the crackling campfire under a blanket of stars. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but the reality of being a cowboy, especially during the great cattle drives of the post-Civil War era, was less about heroic adventure and more about mind-numbing boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. First, let's get you into the role. You're not the pioneer in the wagon anymore. Maybe your farm failed, or you were just a young man looking for work, and you found yourself in Texas with a horse and a desperate need for a paycheck. You're hired on for a cattle drive, pushing a herd of 2,000 or 3,000 longhorns north to the railheads in Kansas. Your job title, drover. Your salary, about $1 a day. Your life for the next 3 months is going to be dust, sweat, and cows. Forget the clean, fringed leather outfits you see in the movies. Your clothes are functional, filthy, and permanently stained with things you don't want to think about. Your life revolves around the things. Your horse and your saddle. Your horse is your partner, your legs, and your lifeline. You take better care of it than you do of yourself. Your saddle is your office chair and, often, your pillow. A good saddle was a cowboy's most prized possession, often costing more than the horse it's add-on. Your day starts before the sun is up. You're woken by the cook, a famously grumpy figure who bangs on a pot and yells something unrepeatable. You crawl out of your bedroll, shake the scorpions out of your boots, a genuine and constant concern, and grab a quick breakfast. What's for breakfast? Coffee, strong enough to dissolve a spirit. and maybe some sort of biscuits or fried salt pork. It's functional fuel, not a culinary experience. Then, you get to work. Your job for the next 12 to 14 hours is to ride alongside a massive, slow-moving river of beef. You are essentially a living fence. You ride on the flank of the herd, a position called the point, or you bring up the rear in the thickest dust, a miserable job known as the drag. Your world shrinks to the sight of hairy brown backs and the constant, low bellowing of cattle. The smell is potent, a mix of dust, sweat, manure, and the unique, heavy scent of thousands of warm animals. The primary enemy on a cattle doctor wasn't bandits or rustlers, though they existed. It was monotony, the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of watching cows walk for hours, for days, for weeks. The landscape changes, but your view doesn't. It's just an endless stream of longhorns. You sing to the cattle, not because you're a cheerful, warbling cowboy, but because the sound of a human voice can soothe them and, more importantly, it helps keep you awake. The songs were often slow, mournful ballads, reflecting the lonely, weary nature of the work. Here's a quirky detail. Cowboys weren't notoriously superstitious. They had a whole list of bad omens. Killing a coyote was bad luck. Some believed that laying a hat or boots on the bedroll invited misfortune. One of the most peculiar beliefs was about lightning. During a thunderstorm, they would sometimes point their six-shooters at the clouds, believing the metal would somehow cut or divert the lightning strike. There's absolutely no scientific basis for this. But in the middle of a terrifying prairie thunderstorm, you'd try just about anything. The boredom was only ever broken by panic. The single most feared event on a cattle drive was a stampede. It could be triggered by anything. A clap of thunder, a tumbleweed blowing past, a nervous horse. Suddenly, the slow-moving river of cattle explodes into a thundering, unstoppable avalanche of horns and hooves. This is where your $1 a day feels like a criminal understatement. You and your horse gallop at breakneck speed in the dark, trying to get to the front of the herd and turn them, forcing them to run in a circle until they exhaust themselves. The ground trembles. The noise is deafening. A fall means certain death, trampled into the dirt in seconds. Many cowboys died this way, their bodies not found for days. Historians still debate the true character of the American cowboy. Were they the rugged, independent individualists of legend, or were they mostly young, underpaid, and exploited laborers in what was essentially a mobile factory, processing beef on the hoof? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. Many were veterans of the Civil War. Some were Mexican vaqueros whose skills the entire industry was built upon. And a surprising number, perhaps, as many as 1 in 4 were African American. Their stories are often left out of the Hollywood myth. At the end of the day, you collapse into your bedroll, every muscle aching. You stare up at the vast, star-filled sky. It's beautiful, yes, but you're too tired to appreciate. You're just grateful the ground isn't shaking and that you don't have to sing another mournful tune to 1,000 oblivious cows. You fall asleep in seconds, smelling of dirt and leather, dreaming of nothing, because tomorrow, it starts all over again. You survived the trail. You've endured the cattle drive. You finally decided to settle down. You've got your plot of land, maybe a small sod house you built with your own hands. You're starting to feel like you've conquered the West. But the West has a million tiny ways to remind you that you are just a guest here, and an unwelcome one at that. The grand, dramatic dangers are one thing. It's the small, everyday threats, the ones that crawl and slither, that will truly test your sanity. You wake up in your dark, earthy-smelling sod die. The first thing you do, before your feet even touch the dirt floor, is a ritual you've learned the hard way. You grab your boots and shake them out vigorously, because a boot is the perfect dark, warm, and cozy place for a scorpion or a brown recluse spider to have spent the night. A sting or a bite out here, miles from any doctor, isn't just painful. A scorpion sting can cause fever and convulsions, especially in a child. A brown recluse bite can lead to a nasty, necrotic ulcer that eats away at the flesh. A wound that simply will not heal in this unsanitary environment. You step outside to greet the morning. The prairie is not an empty, manicured lawn. It's a thriving ecosystem, and you are the intruder. As you walk towards your small vegetable patch, you learn to watch the ground, not for bandits, but for rattlesnakes. They are masters of camouflage, blending in perfectly with the dry grass and dusty soil. You don't always hear the rattle before it's too late. The bite is a searing, hot pain, like being stabbed with a red-hot poker. The venom is a hemotoxin, which means it attacks your blood and tissue. The area around the bite swells up dramatically, turning a dark, bruised purple. What do? The cowboy myth tells you to cut an axe over the bite and suck out the venom. This is, and I cannot stress this enough, a terrible idea. All it does is create a larger wound, increase the risk of infection, and put venom in your mouth. The other popular cure was to pour whiskey on it and drink the rest of the bottle. This is also a spectacularly bad idea. Alcohol thins the blood, which can actually help the venom spread faster. So, you've made the wound worse, potentially poisoned yourself, and gotten drunk. A trifecta of poor medical choices. The actual treatment was grim, with no antivenom available. Your only hope was to lie down, stay as still as possible to slow the spread of the venom, and pray that the dose wasn't a lethal one. You would endure days of agonizing pain, fever, and delirium. If you survive, you might be left with a permanently damaged limb or a nasty scar. Many didn't. Here's a bizarre and slightly horrifying tidbit of frontier pest control. Your sod house, made of earth and grass, was a paradise for insects and small creatures to deal with infestations of fleas, bed bugs, and other critters. A common practice was to temporarily move the family out and fumigate the house by burning sulfur inside. This would create toxic sulfur dioxide gas, killing most of the pests. It was also, of course, highly flammable and poisonous to humans if not aired out properly. Did it work? Mostly. Was it incredibly dangerous? Absolutely. Historians still find accounts of this in diaries. A desperate measure for a desperate problem. The dangers weren't just venomous. The sheer number of insects could be a form of torture. Plagues of locusts, or grasshoppers, as they were often called, could descend in biblical swarms, blotting out the sun and consuming every green thing in their path. A farmer could watch his entire year's crop, his family's entire food supply, disappear in a matter of hours. The sound of their collective chewing was said to be a deafening, rustling roar. There was nothing you could do but watch in horror. And then there are the less dramatic, but equally maddening, pests. Mosquitoes, thriving in any stagnant water, weren't just an annoyance. They were vectors for diseases like malaria, which they called dengue or swamp fever, a recurring illness of chills and fever that could plague a family for years. Biting flies would torment your livestock, sometimes driving them into a frenzy. Academics still debate the psychological toll of this constant, low-level warfare. It was just the fear of a sudden, violent death, but the grinding, wearing down effect of 1,000 tiny battles, the constant vigilance, the fear of what might be lurking in the dark corners of your own home, the knowledge that your hard-won homestead could be devoured by a cloud of insects. It created a specific kind of frontier mentality, a mix of incredible resilience and a deep, underlying anxiety. As you go about your day, you are never truly at ease. Every shadow could be a snake. Every itch could be a spider bite. Every dark cloud on the horizon could be a swarm of locusts. You came west to be your own master, to tame the land. But as you shake out your boots for the 10th time, you have to wonder who is really taming whom. The land is not fighting back with grand gestures. It's fighting back with a million tiny, creeping, crawling reminders that you do not belong here. You've managed to build a life of sorts. You have a small claim, a handful of cattle, and a routine. You've learned to check your boots and watch for snakes. You feel like you're getting the hang of this survival game. So, you decide it's time for a trip to the nearest town. Town means supplies, a real drink, and maybe even some human interaction that doesn't involve arguing over whose turn it is to fetch water. But as you ride into the dusty, single-street settlement, you'll quickly find that the dangers of the West aren't just in the wilderness. They are leaning against the saloon porch, drunk, bored, and armed. Let's be very clear about the gunfight at high noon. The dramatic one-to-one duel between a hero and a villain, with the whole town watching, is almost entirely a creation of Hollywood. It almost never happened. Real violence in the Old West was sudden, ugly, and almost always pointless. It was fueled by alcohol, pride, and the simple fact that nearly everyone was carrying a gun. You tie your horse to the hitching post outside the general store. The town is a collection of rough, unpainted wooden buildings. There's a general store, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and, of course, a saloon. Or three. The saloon is the social and economic heart of the town, and also its most dangerous place. You decide to get your supplies first. As you walk down the dusty street, you practice the unwritten rule of the frontier town. You don't make eye contact. You keep your gaze neutral, your posture non-threatened. You are broadcasting, with every step, that you are not looking for trouble. Inside the general store, you trade some of your farm goods for flour, coffee, and a new axe handle. The man behind the counter is polite but wary. HES seen men like you come and go. HES also seen them carried out of the saloon feet first, after your shopping. The temptation of the saloon is too strong. You just want one beer. Not the rot gut whiskey that can strip bait, but a cool, foamy beer. You push through the swinging doors. The air inside is thick with the smell of stale beer, cheap whiskey, sweat, and unwashed bodies. It's dark, even in the middle of the day. A few men are playing cards at a rickety table in the corner. A lone piano player is mechanically plinking out a tune. You step up to the bar and order your drink. This is where things get dangerous. The men at the card table are losing money. They've been drinking since morning. Their tempers are as frayed as their cuffs. A dispute breaks out, not over a fortune, but over a hand worth maybe 50 cents. One man accuses another of cheating. Voices are raised. A chair is scraped back. This is the moment where, in a movie, the hero would intervene. You are not a hero. You are a bystander. And the smartest thing you can do is make yourself as small as possible and slowly back away. The argument escalates with terrifying speed. There's no dramatic speech, no slow walk into the street. One of the men, fueled by whiskey and wounded pride, simply pulls his revolver and shoots the other man at point-blank range. The boom of the Colt Peacemaker is deafening in the enclosed space. The room fills with acrid, black powder smoke. The man who was shot clutches his stomach, a look of stunned surprise on his face, and slumps to the floor. The shooter stands there for a second, his gun smoking, looking just as shocked as everyone else. Then he turns and stumbles out the door, disappearing into the daylight. It's over in 5 seconds. It was messy, pointless, and deeply unsettling. There was no honor, no skill, just a stupid, drunken argument that ended in death. This was the reality of most gunfights. Historians have studied the records of towns like Tombstone, Dodge City, and the vast majority of killings were just like this. Sudden, close-range affairs, often involving people who were drunk, angry, or both. The idea of the quick-draw artist is largely a myth. What mattered was being the fastest, but being the one willing to shoot first. Here's a small but fascinating legal detail. In many of these frontier towns, the law was flexible. If the shooter was caught, he might claim self-defense. The only witnesses were the other drunks in the saloon, whose testimony would be unreliable at best. Juries were often made up of the man's friends. If the victim was an unpopular figure, the shooter might even be hailed as a local hero for ridding the town of a nuisance. The line between murder and community service was alarmingly thin. This is a point that legal historians still find fascinating, how community sentiment could completely override the letter of the law. You look down at the man bleeding onto the filthy floorboards. The bartender just sighs, grabs a rag, and gestures for someone to drag the body outside. It's an inconvenience, a mess he has to clean up. No one is crying, no one is calling for justice. It's just another afternoon. You haven't even finished your beer, but you've lost your thirst. You place a coin on the bar and walk out, back into the bright sunlight, your heart hammering against your ribs. You get on your horse and ride out of town without looking back. The quiet, lonely dangers of your homestead, the snakes, the spiders, the solitude suddenly seem a lot more manageable than the random, senseless violence of civilization. The news spreads like a wildfire across the plains, carried by travelers, whispered in saloons, and printed in smudgy ink-blotched newspapers. Gold, not just a little bit, but vast, unbelievable quantities of it, just sitting in the creeks and rivers of California, or deep in the mountains of Colorado, or the Black Hills of Dakota. Your small farm, with its endless struggle against drought and locusts, suddenly seems like a fool's errand. The dream that brought you westland is instantly replaced by a new, more glittering one. Wealth? So, you sell your claim for a pittance, pack a mule with a pickaxe, a shovel, and a tin pan, and join the frantic, lemming-like rush to the latest gold strike. You are now a prospector, a 49er, a greenhorn chasing a dream. You are also, most likely, marching towards ruin. The journey to the gold fields is its own special kind of hell, a condensed version of the Pioneer Trail, but with a manic, feverish energy. The trails are choked with men from every walk of life, failed farmers like you, clerks who abandoned their desks, sailors who jumped ship, and con artists who realized the easiest thing to mine was the pockets of the miners themselves. There is no camaraderie here, no sense of a shared journey. Every other man on the trail is your competition. You might smile and share his fire, but you both know you de-trip each other for a promising-looking patch of dirt. You arrive at the mining camp. Camp is a generous word. It's a chaotic, sprawling slum that seems to have erupted from the mud overnight. It's a dense maze of canvas tents, rough log shacks, and open-air gambling tables. The streets are rivers of mud, littered with garbage, broken bottles, and the occasional passed-out drunk. The noise is constant, the clang of pickaxes against rock, the rumble of cradles sorting gravel, the shouts of men in a dozen different languages, and the tinny, relentless music from the saloons that never close. Your first day is a lesson in back-breaking labor. You find a small, unclaimed patch of a creek bed. All the good spots were taken months ago, and you start to pan. You scoop gravel and water into your flat, metal pan. You swirl it, carefully, letting the lighter sand and pebbles wash over the side. Your back aches. Your hands are freezing in the icy mountain water. You do this for hours. Swirl, check, swirl, check. Your eyes strain to see the telltale glint at the bottom of the pan. Most of the time, there's nothing, just mud. But then, you see it, a tiny, gleaming flake of gold, no bigger than a grain of sand. Your heart leaps. It's real. This tiny flake is what keeps you going. It's the hook. You work for 12, 14 hours a day, fueled by this sliver of hope. You stand in freezing water until your legs are numb. You shovel gravel until your shoulders scream in protest. And at the end of a long, miserable day, you might have a small vial with a few dollars worth of gold dust in it. But here's the kicker. Everything in this boomtown is astronomically expensive. The con artists I mentioned earlier, they're the ones getting rich. A single egg might cost $1, a full day's wages for a laborer back east. A shovel that would cost 50 cents in street. Lewis costs $10 here. A shot of whiskey is a pinch of gold dust. And the bartender's thumb is always a little heavy. You are working yourself to death to find gold, only to immediately hand it over for the basic necessities of life. The real gold rush, as the saying goes, was for the merchants. Let's talk about your diet. You're living on what you can easily cook over a fire. That means bacon, beans, and sourdough bread, so called because the yeast starter was a precious commodity, jealously guarded and shared among miners. It also means you're probably developing scurvy, with no fresh fruit or vegetables. The lack of vitamin C makes your gums bleed, your joints ache, and old wounds reopen. It's a slow, painful decline that many miners mistook for simple exhaustion. This is a fascinatedly grim detail that is often overlooked. Many of these tough, rugged gold seekers were slowly being incapacitated by a simple dietary deficiency. The social structure of the camp is non-existent. There is no law, other than the swift and brutal miner's justice. If a man is caught stealing, a mob might convene an impromptu court. The sentence is often flogging, banishment, or hanging from the nearest tree. There's no appeal. Historians still debate whether this was a form of grassroots democracy or simply mob rule. For you, it's just another source of terror. You guard your tiny vial of gold dust with your life, sleeping with it clutched in your hand. Weeks turn into months. Your hands are raw. Your back is permanently stooped. The initial thrill is gone, replaced by a dull, aching desperation. You see men who struck it rich, their sudden wealth making them reckless and loud. But for every one of them, you see 100 others like yourself, gaunt, weary, and poorer than when they started. The gold rush was a lottery. It was a machine for grinding men down, chewing them up and spitting them out. Broken and penniless, you finally have to admit defeat. Your body is broken, your spirit is crushed, and your pockets are empty. The dream of gold has dissolved back into the mud from which it came. You came here seeking a fortune that would solve all your problems. Now, you did give anything to be back on your quiet, dusty farm, dealing with honest problems like drought and locusts, instead of the soul-corroding poison of greed. The glitter of the gold rush has faded, leaving you with nothing but empty pockets and the bitter taste of a fool's dream. You've crawled back from that manic desperation, not to the life you left back east, but to the original, more humble promise of the West. Land, through the Homestead Act, you've secured a 160-acre plot on the vast, windswept plains of Nebraska or Kansas. You are now a landowner. The only problem is, your land is completely empty. There's no house, no barn, no shelter, and winter is coming. This isn't about building a dream house. This is about not freezing to death. You look around your property. It's a sea of grass, stretching to the horizon in every direction. There are no trees, not a single one. The romantic notion of a sturdy log cabin, the quintessential symbol of the American frontier, is a complete fantasy here. You can't build a log cabin without logs. So, what do you build with? You build with the only resource you have in abundance, the ground itself. You are going to build a house out of dirt. It's called a sod house, or a sod die. The name sounds quaint. The reality is brutal. Back-breaking labor. First, you need the right tools. You use a special type of plow or breaking plow to cut the sod. You're not just turning over soil. You're slicing up the dense, tangled root system of the prairie grass, which has been growing undisturbed for centuries. You cut the sod in 2 long ribbons, then chop them into manageable bricks, each one weighing 50 pounds or more. This is your building material. The settlers called it prairie marble. It was a joke, but a grimly accurate one. Now you build the walls. You lay the sod bricks grass side down, staggering the seams just like a real bricklayer. It's slow, heavy work. You lift thousands of pounds of earth, 1 block at a time, your muscles screaming in protest. The walls go up, 2 or 3 feet thick, creating a fortress against the elements. For the roof, you need a ridge pole. This is the one part where you absolutely need wood, and it's precious. Maybe you were able to buy a few cottonwood poles from a river valley miles away, or maybe you scavenged them from an abandoned wagon. You lay them across the top, cover them with brush or more sod, and hope for the best. Your new home is finished. It's a small, 1-room rectangle, hunkered down low to the ground. From a distance, it almost disappears, blending seamlessly into the landscape. Inside, it's dark. The windows, if you can afford glass, are tiny to conserve heat and maintain structural integrity. More likely, you have a single opening covered with a greased paper pane, which lets in a dim, murky light. The floor is just packed earth. The door might be a salvaged plank, or simply a heavy blanket hung over the opening. Living in a sod die is a unique experience. It does have some advantages. The thick walls make it incredibly well insulated. It's cool in the blistering summer heat, and once you get a fire going, relatively warm in the winter. It's also fireproof, a huge bonus and prone to prairie fires. But the downsides are numerous. The house is never, ever truly dry. A heavy rain will soak through the sod roof, dripping muddy water onto you, your bed, and your food for days after the storm has passed. And it's not just water that comes through the roof. The sod is still a living ecosystem. It's filled with insects, worms, and the occasional mouse or snake. It was a common and horrifying experience for settlers to have a snake drop from the ceiling onto their dinner table. One of the small, strange markers of civilization in a sod house was having enough cloth to pin to the ceiling, creating a makeshift canopy called a brummer to catch the worst of the falling debris. To make the interior more livable, you might try to plaster the walls with a mixture of local clay and dash. When it dries, you can whitewash it, creating a brighter, cleaner surface. Historians and archaeologists still find remnants of these plastered walls, a testament to the human desire to create a clean and orderly home, even in the most primitive conditions. The psychological impact of living in what was essentially a dark, damp burrow is a subject historians still debate. Did it foster a unique toughness and resilience? Or did it contribute to the profound loneliness and depression, sometimes called prairie madness, that afflicted so many settlers, especially women who spent their days alone in these gloomy dwellings? You stand in your finished sod house. It smells of damp earth and smoke from your small stove, which is likely fueled by dried buffalo or cow chips. As there's no wood to burn, it's cramped, it's dark, and you know you'll be sharing it with an assortment of crawling creatures. But as the fierce prairie wind howls outside, and you are safe and sheltered within its thick earthen walls, you feel a sense of grim accomplishment. It's not the grand house you ever imagined, but it's yours. And out here, it's the difference between life and death. You've built your sod house, the dark, earthy refuge against the vast emptiness of the prairie. You have shelter. Now you have to face the next relentless, daily challenge, feeding yourself. The romantic image of the West is a feast of wild game and hearty, simple meals cooked over a crackling campfire. The reality, for a homesteader like you, is a monotonous, often desperate struggle for calories, where the line between sustenance and starvation is terrifyingly thin. Let's start with the cornerstone of your diet, bread. You don't pop down to the bakery. You make it yourself, from the sacks of flour you manage to haul across the country. But it's not light, fluffy bread. You're likely making hardtack, also known as sea biscuit or pilot bread. This is a simple, unleavened cracker made of flour, water, and maybe a little salt. It's baked until it's rock hard, almost indestructible. Why? Because it's incredibly stable. It won't mold or spoil for months, even years. This makes it the perfect survival food. It's also nearly inedible. To eat hardtack, you can't just bite into it, unless you want to break a tooth. You have to smash it with the butt of your axe or a rock. Then soak the pieces in coffee or water until they soften into a bland, gritty mush. Sometimes you fry the soaked crumbs in bacon grease, a dish colorfully known as skilly-gay. It was filling, but no one was writing home about the flavor. Next up, meat. You dream of roasted turkey and thick buffalo steaks. And yes, in the early days, there was abundant game, but as more settlers arrived, the game was quickly hunted out of the local area. A deer or a brace of prairie chickens became a rare and celebrated treat. Your main source of meat is the pig you managed to bring with you, or the barrel of salted pork you have in the corner of your sod die. Salt pork is just that. Pork cured in a massive amount of salt to preserve it. It's tough, intensely salty, and has to be soaked for hours before it's even remotely palatable. You'll fry it for breakfast, boil it with beans for dinner, and grow to hate the sight of it. Here's a curious and slightly disgusting food fact from the era when meat was starting to turn, which it did with alarming speed in the summer. Cooks wouldn't throw it out. They couldn't afford to. Instead, they would often cook it with a generous amount of saleratus, a type of baking soda, which helped to neutralize the sour taste and smell of decay. Whether this actually made the meat safer to eat is a point of scientific contention, but it was a common practice born of pure necessity. The idea of freshness was a luxury you couldn't afford. What about vegetables? You have a small garden patch you painstakingly carved out of the prairie sod. You've planted corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of Native American agriculture, a robust and reliable combination. But your garden is under constant assault. Drought can wither it. A sudden hailstorm can pulverize it in minutes. and a swarm of grasshoppers can eat it to the ground while you watch, helpless. If you do get a harvest, you have to preserve it. You'll dry corn and beans. You might learn to make pickles if you have vinegar and salt, but for long stretches of the year, especially in the winter, your diet is almost completely devoid of fresh produce. This leads, again, to the quiet, creeping menace of nutritional deficiencies like scurvy. Let's talk about coffee. Coffee was a non-negotiable staple. It was more than a drink. It was a ritual, a comfort, a source of warmth and energy. You didn't have pre-ground coffee. Of course, you had green coffee beans. Every few days, you would roast them over the fire in a skillet, a process that required constant attention to avoid burning them. Then you degrind them, often by putting them in a cloth bag and smashing them with a rock. The resulting brew was gritty, smoky, and probably bitter, but it was hot and caffeinated. And that's what mattered. If you ran out of real coffee, you demake coffee out of roasted corn, rye, or even dandelion roots. It was a desperate imitation, a testament to how essential the real thing was to your morale. Historians who study pioneer diaries are often struck by how much of the writing is about food, not grand descriptions of meals, but anxious, meticulous notes about the state of their supplies. Flour sack is half empty. Salt pork is getting low. The corn is starting to sprout. They were amateur accountants of their own survival. There's a quiet debate among academics about how to interpret these entries. Are they simply practical notes, or do they represent a deeper, underlying anxiety about the fragility of their existence, where life and death could be measured in pounds of flour and inches of salted pork? One evening, you sit down to your dinner. It's the same meal you had yesterday and the day before. A plate of boiled beans, a small, greasy piece of salt pork, and a chunk of hardtack soaking in your coffee. You eat in silence, too tired to talk. There's no joy in this meal. It is purely functional. As you chew the tough, salty meat, you think about the varied, flavorful meals you used to take for granted back east. A piece of fresh baked pie, a simple apple, a glass of cool milk. They seem like luxuries from another lifetime. Out here, you don't eat for pleasure. You eat to see the sun rise tomorrow. We've spent a lot of time focusing on the general you, a figure who has, by default, been male. But the experience of the West was profoundly different depending on who you were. If you were a woman, you faced all the same dangers: the disease, the harsh environment, the threat of violence, but they were filtered through a completely different set of social rules, expectations, and vulnerabilities. Your journey west was not just a struggle against nature. It was a struggle within a rigid and unforgiving social structure. Let's rewind. You're back on the Oregon Trail, walking alongside that lurching, miserable wagon, while the men are occupied with the heavy labor of driving the oxen and repairing the wagon. Your work is just as physically demanding, but it never, ever ends. You are responsible for what was known as women's work, a domain that was considered separate but was, in fact, the glue that held the entire enterprise together. Your day starts before the men's and ends after theirs. You are the first one up, tasked with starting the fire, often with damp wood or buffalo chicks, and preparing breakfast. After a long day of walking, yes, you walk too. Often carrying a young child, you arrive at the campsite, exhausted, but your work is just beginning. The men can finally rest, but you have to gather more fuel, haul water from the river, and cook the evening meal for your entire family over an open fire. After dinner, you have to clean up, mend torn clothes by firelight, and care for the sick. You fall into your bedroll bone tired, only to wake up in a few short hours and do it all again. One of the great, unsung hero objects of the westward journey was the Dutch oven. This heavy, cast iron pot with a flanged lid was a woman's most essential tool. You could use it to bake bread by burying it in hot coals, fry meat, or make stew. It was a portable kitchen, and a skilled woman could produce surprisingly sophisticated meals with it. The competence to manage a household under these impossible conditions was a source of immense pride and identity, but your life was also defined by a profound lack of autonomy. In most cases, the decision to go west was not yours. It was made by your husband or father. You were leaving behind your home, your community, your network of female friends and relatives, the entire social fabric of your life for a future you had no say in. The diaries of many pioneer women are filled with passages of deep sadness and a sense of profound loss for the world they left behind. Here's a small, poignant detail. Women fought desperately to maintain a sense of normalcy and civilization on the trail. They would insist on stopping on Sundays to observe the Sabbath, a respite the men often begrudged as a waste of a good travel day. They would carefully pack a few precious items, a lace collar, a set of teacups, not because they were practical, but because they were symbols of the refined life they were trying to recreate in the wilderness. Historians are still debating the full impact of this civilizing mission women undertook. Was it a vital effort to maintain social cohesion, or was it a burden that added yet another layer of expectation onto their already overworked lives? Once you settle on the homestead, the isolation can be crushing. Your sod house is an island in a sea of grass. Your husband might be out in the fields all day, or gone for days at a time to hunt or trade. You are left alone, often for weeks on end, with only your children for company. The constant wind, the vast, empty horizon, the loneliness, it took a heavy psychological toll. This is the root of prairie madness, a condition of severe depression and anxiety that particularly affected women. Your only social interaction might be a rare visit from a neighbor who lives 5 miles away. And then there is the constant, looming threat of childbirth. There is no doctor, no midwife, just you and maybe a neighbor woman who has seen it all before. Giving birth in a dark, unsanitary sod house was incredibly dangerous. Infection was rampant, and complications that would be minor today were often a death sentence for both mother and child. The West is filled with the graves of young women who died in childbirth, their dreams of a new life buried with them. Yet, despite all this, the West also, paradoxically, offered women new opportunities. The harsh realities of frontier life often broke down traditional gender roles out of sheer necessity. A woman might have to learn to plow the fields, hunt for food, or defend the homestead if her husband was away or incapacitated. This fostered a level of independence and competence that would have been unthinkable back east. In the Western Territories, women gained the right to vote decades before the rest of the country, partly in an effort to attract more female settlers, but also in recognition of the vital role they played in building these new communities. It's one of the great ironies of the West. A place that subjected women to immense hardship also became the cradle of their political empowerment. So you stand at the door of your sod die, looking out at the endless expanse of grass. You are a cook, a doctor, a farmer, a teacher to your children, a seamstress, a laundress. Your hands are rough. Your face is weathered by the sun and wind. You are not the delicate flower you were raised to be. You are a survivor. And in your quiet, relentless, often invisible way, you are the one who is truly taming this wild land. Not with a gun or a plow, but with the steady, unending work of building a home. Life on your homestead is a relentless series of calculations, a constant weighing of risk and reward. You've learned to manage the big, obvious threats, the blizzards, the droughts, the rattlesnakes, but the most devastating event might not be some grand, dramatic catastrophe. It could be something as simple, as mundane, and as utterly ruinous as a moment of clumsiness. Imagine this. You're out trying to repair a fence line a mile from your sod house. The ground is uneven, packed with gopher holes. You misstep. Your ankle twists, and you go down hard. You hear a sound you will never forget, a wet, sickening cry. A wave of white-hot, nauseating pain floods your body. You look down. Your leg is bent at an angle that is horribly, fundamentally wrong. You've broken your tibia. In the 21st century, this is a painful but manageable inconvenience. You'd get a cast, some crutches, and a few weeks of Netflix binging. In the 19th century West, you are now facing a life-or-death crisis. First, you have to get home. You crawl. You drag your shattered leg through the dirt and grass, the sharp ends of the bone grinding against each other with every movement. The pain is unimaginable, a roaring inferno that threatens to make you pass out. Every foot of progress is an eternity of agony. By the time you reach your sod die, you're in shock, covered in dirt and sweat, and whimpering like a child. Your family lays you down on your cot. They don't know what to do. They can see the bone threatening to push through the skin. This is a compound fracture, a death sentence in waiting. Even a simple, clean break is a disaster. There's no hospital, no orthopedic surgeon. There might be the traveling doctor with his lancets and mercury pills, but even is useless here. The best he could do is try to set it. Let's say it's a simple fracture. Your spouse or a neighbor will have to try to set the bone themselves. They'll grab your foot and your torso and pull, trying to force the bones back into alignment. The sound of the bones grating, your own screams echoing in the tiny sod house. It's a scene of pure, primitive horror. There is no anesthesia. Maybe they'll give you a shot of whiskey or have you bite down on a leather strap, but it does little to dull the excruciating pain. They'll then split the leg with whatever they have, pieces of a wooden crate, maybe some thick branches, and wrap it tightly with cloth. Now you wait. You are completely immobilized. You can't work. You can't help around the homestead. You are another mouth to feed, another burden on your already struggling family. Your injury doesn't just affect you. It threatens the survival of your entire family. But the real enemy is infection. If it was a compound fracture, where the bone broke the skin, infection is not a risk. It's a certainty. The dirt, the unwashed hands, the very air is teeming with bacteria. Within a few days, the leg will become swollen, red, and hot. Pus will begin to oop from the wound. You'll develop a raging fever and become delirious. You have gangrene. Now you have only two choices, both of them horrific. The first is to do nothing and let the infection run its course. You will die, slowly and painfully, from sepsis. The second choice is amputation. This is a decision no one should have to make. But out here, it's a practical one. The leg has to come off to save your life. The procedure will be performed on your kitchen table. The surgeon might be the local blacksmith, whose experience with a saw is deemed a valuable skill. The only surgical tools are a butcher's knife and a carpenter's saw, may be heated in the fire with the vague, mistaken idea that this somehow cleans them. They will tie you down. For strong men will hold your arms and your good leg. They will give you a bottle of whiskey and tell you to drink as much as you can, as fast as you can. It won't be enough. The surgeon will take the knife and cut through the skin and muscle, down to the bone. Your screams will be inhuman. Then, he takes the saw. The sound of a saw cutting through living bone is a sound that will haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Here's a grim but fascinating medical detail that surgeons of the era knew well. Speed was everything. A good amputation surgeon could take off a leg in under a minute. It wasn't about precision. It was about minimizing the time the patient had to endure the conscious agony. They would then cauterize the wound, pressing a red-hot piece of iron against the stump to seal the blood vessels and, they hope, burn away the poison. The smell of burning flesh will fill the room. If you survive the shock and the blood loss of the procedure itself, your chances are still slim. Post-operative infection was rampant. Many people survived the amputation only to die a week later from the infected stump. But some, the tough and the lucky, survived. You wake up, groggy from the whiskey and the trauma. The relentless, throbbing pain in your leg is gone. In fact, your leg is gone. You are now a cripple in a world that has no place for the disabled. How will you farm? How will you work? You have survived, but your life is forever changed, all because of one misstep. It's a brutal reminder that in the West, the line between a normal day and a life-altering catastrophe is as thin and fragile as a human bone, and historians continue to study this reality, looking at how the constant threat of such injuries shaped the psyche and the community bonds of the frontier. You've survived injury, you've survived sickness, and you've managed to eke out a harvest from your stubborn patch of prairie. You start to feel a sliver of confidence, a dangerous thing in this part of the world. You've been so focused on the threats you can see the snakes, the failing supplies, the infected wound that you've forgotten to look up at the sky. Out here, the weather isn't just a topic of conversation. It's an active, and often malevolent, character in the story of your life. It's more powerful than any outlaw and more destructive than any stampede. Let's start with the summer. The sun is not a friendly, life-giving orb. It is a relentless, punishing tyrant. It beats down on the treeless plains, baking the earth into a cracked, dusty wasteland. The heat is suffocating, a physical weight that drains your energy and parches your throat. Your side house offers a cool, cave-like respite, but you can't stay in there forever. The crops need tending. The animals need water. You work under the oppressive glare, your clothes soaked with sweat, a constant swarm of flies buzzing around your head. The heat brings the threat of drought. The rain simply stops. For weeks, then months, the sky remains a vast, empty, metallic blue. Your corn, once so promising, begins to wilt and turn yellow. The creek where you get your water shrinks from a stream to a trickle, and then to a series of stagnant, muddy pools. Your well, which you dug by hand, runs dry. The prairie grass turns from green to gold to a brittle, desiccated brown. You start rationing water, first for the crops, then for the animals, and finally for your own family. A single cup of murky, warm water becomes a precious luxury, and with the drought comes the fire. A lightning strike, a spark from a passing train, or an unattended campfire can ignite the tinder-dry prairie. The fire doesn't just burn, it explodes. A wall of flame, dozens of feet high, races across the landscape faster than a horse can run, devouring everything in its path. The sound is a terrifying roar. The sky turns black with smoke, and the air is filled with the smell of burning grass and terror. Your fireproof sod might save you, but it won't save your crops, your bark, or your animals. You can only huddle inside, listening to the world burn around you, and pray the fire passes quickly. Then comes the other extreme, winter. The first blizzard arrives with shocking, brutal speed. One moment it's a cold, gray day. The next, the sky opens up and unleashes a blinding, swirling wall of white. The temperature plummets. The wind howls like a banshee, a physical force that batters the walls of your little house. You're trapped. Stepping outside means certain death. You could become disoriented and freeze to death just a few feet from your own front door. A strange and tragic phenomenon of these prairie blizzards was that people would tie a rope from their house to their barn. In the whiteout conditions, this simple rope was the only thing that could guide them safely back and forth to care for their precious livestock. There are countless stories of people who let go of the rope for a second, or whose rope broke and were found froze unsolid in the spring. Sometimes, just yards from safety, inside your sod dye, you huddle around your small stove, feeding it a constant supply of dried cow chips. The snow piles up against the walls, burying your house completely, plunging you into a dim, subterranean world. You're living in a snow cave. The days are long and mind-numbingly boring. You ration your food, listening to the relentless wind, and wondering if the storm will ever end. Historians looking at diaries from this period note the psychological toll of these long shut-ins, where cabin fever could escalate into despair and family tensions could fray to the breaking point. But perhaps the most bizarre and terrifying weather event is the hailstorm. It arrives on a hot, humid summer day. The sky turns a strange, sickly green-black. Then, you hear it a low rumble that grows into a roar, like a freight train in the sky, and then it hits. Not rain, but ice. Chunks of ice, some the size of marbles, some the size of eggs, some as big as baseballs, hammer down from the sky. They shatter your windows, punch holes in your roof, and shred your crops into green ribbons in a matter of minutes. The noise is deafening, a relentless, violent drumming that makes you feel like the world is ending. Your animals, caught out in the open, can be injured or killed. In 5 minutes of surreal violence, your entire year's work can be utterly destroyed. There's an ongoing debate among climate historians about whether the climate in the West was genuinely more extreme during the settlement period or if the settlers were just uniquely unprepared for its normal patterns. The promotional pamphlets had promised a mild, rain-blessed climate. The rain follows. The plow theory was a popular and dangerously wrong idea that settlement would magically increase rainfall. The reality was a climate of violent, unpredictable extremes. You look out your window at your ruined fields. Yesterday, you were a homesteader with a promising crop. Today, you are a survivor on a battered landscape with nothing. The weather didn't care about your hard work or your dreams. It is the true, impartial, and absolute power in this land. It gives the sun, and it takes with fire. It gives the rain, and it takes with hail. And you are just a tiny, fragile figure, living at its mercy in the chaotic, violent world of the West you've been navigating. The idea of the law seems like a distant, abstract concept. You've seen pointless murders in saloons and swift, brutal mob justice in mining camps. But as settlements grow from a few tents into actual towns, a strange and often clumsy process begins. The birth of organized law. Don't picture a noble sheriff single-handedly taming a town. Picture a messy, inconsistent, and often corrupt system struggling to impose order on a world that actively resists it. You are now in a slightly more established frontier town. It has a name, a mayor who also owns the saloon, and, most importantly, a sheriff. This sheriff is not necessarily the most heroic or the fastest gun in town. More likely, he is the man who was willing to take a low-paying, incredibly dangerous job that nobody else wanted. He might be a former buffalo hunter, a failed prospector, or just a guy who looked tough enough to pin it in-star to his vest. His authority is fragile, based less on any legal document and more on his personal reputation and his willingness to use his Colt revolver. The first thing you'll notice is that the law is selective. The sheriff is primarily concerned with keeping a lid on things. A certain amount of violence is expected and even tolerated. A fair fight between two cowboys. He might just watch to make sure no innocent bystanders get hit. But if someone starts shooting up the town and breaking windows at the general store, he'll step in. His job is less about enforcing abstract justice and more about protecting property and preventing total chaos. You witness an arrest. A man is dragged, drunk and belligerent, to the jail. This isn't a building with iron bars. It might just be a reinforced storage cellar, a dugout in the side of a hill, or in some smaller towns, simply a heavy chain bolted to a large rock. The legal process is rudimentary. The next morning, the man is brought before the justice of the peace, who might also be the town's barber or postmaster. The trial is short. The evidence is the sheriff's testimony. The sentence is usually a fine, and this is where the system gets interesting and often corrupt. The town's entire legal system, the sheriff, the justice of the peace. The informants was often unfunded by the fines they collected. This created a powerful incentive to arrest and fine people for minor infractions. Things like being drunk in public, riding your horse too fast down the main street furious riding, or carrying a firearm within town limits became profitable crimes. In many wild towns like Dodge City or Wichita, the biggest source of revenue was from finding the very cowboys they were trying to attract for their cattle drive money. It was a perfectly cynical, circular economy of vice and fines. Here's a bizarre but true legal quirk from the era: the concept of a vagrant. If you arrived in town with no job and no visible means of support, you could be arrested for vagrancy. The fine was often more money than you had, so you'd be forced to work it off on a town project, like digging a ditch or repairing a road. It was a way for these fledgling towns to get free labor and to control the population, ensuring that only productive members of society were allowed to stay. Historians of law and society still study these vagrancy laws as a key mechanism for social control on the frontier. The line between lawman and outlaw was also notoriously thin. Many famous lawmen had checkered pasts, and many outlaws were seen as folk heroes by a populace that was deeply suspicious of any authority. A sheriff might bend the rules to protect his friends, and a cattle baron might have the local law enforcement in his pocket to harass smaller homesteaders. The law was to blind, impartial force. It was a tool, and it could be wielded by whoever had the most power, money, or guns. This leads to the rise of another frontier institution, the Vigilance Committee, when the official law was seen as too slow, too corrupt, or too weak. A group of prominent citizens would take the law into their own hands. They would round up suspected horse thieves, rustlers, or murderers and hold their own secret trials. The sentence was almost always death by hanging. These vigilantes saw themselves as righteous crusaders, purging their community of evil. Their victims and their families saw them as nothing more than a lynch mob. The legacy of these committees is still hotly debated by historians. Were they a necessary evil, a way for communities to protect themselves in the absence of effective government? Or were they a dangerous rejection of due process that led to the deaths of innocent people based on rumor and prejudice? The answer is uncomfortably complex. You're sitting in the saloon, you've learned to sit in the corner, facing the door, and you watch the sheriff walk in. HES, not a shining hero. HES, a tired-looking man with a heavy mustache and weary eyes. HES trying to keep a fragile peace in a town full of armed, drunk, and desperate men. He is the living embodiment of this new, imperfect law. It's not fair, it's not always just, and it's often hypocritical. But as you watch him quietly convince two rowdy cowboys to take their argument outside, you realize that for all its flaws, it's better than the alternative. It's the first shaky step away from pure anarchy, and on the frontier, that's a pretty big step. You've established your homestead, you've dealt with the unpredictable weather, and you've even learned to navigate the strange, fledgling legal system of the nearest town. You've started to feel a sense of mastery over your little patch of the West. But your 160 acres are not a vacuum. You are living in a world that is still profoundly wild, and you share this space with its original inhabitants. The animals, they are not characters in a nature documentary. They are your neighbors, your food source, and sometimes your most deadly adversaries. Let's start with the most iconic animal of the plains, the buffalo, or more accurately, the American bison. In the early days of settlement, they were an unbelievable resource. A single bison could provide hundreds of pounds of meat, a thick robe for wool, and a hide that could be used for everything from moccasins to teepee covers. The sheer number of them was staggering, vast herds that stretched for miles, so dense they could make the ground tremble as they moved. For a homesteader, a nearby herd meant a supply of fresh meat that could see you through the winter. But hunting a bison was no small feat. These were not docile cows. A full-grown bull could weigh a ton and stand 6 feet tall at the shoulder. They were powerful, fast, and incredibly dangerous when wounded. You'd hunt them on horseback, a risky endeavor that required a good horse and a steady hand with a heavy-caliber rifle like a sharp's. A misstep by your horse, or a charge from a wounded bull, could end your life in an instant. Then, you witnessed the great slaughter. The professional buffalo hunters arrived, armed with long-range rifles. They weren't hunting for food, they were hunting for hides. To feed the insatiable demand for leather back east, they would find a herd, set up on a high vantage point, and kill hundreds of animals in a single day, leaving the carcasses to rot on the prairie. It was an industrial-scale extermination. In just a few decades, the herds that had numbered in the tens of millions were reduced to a few hundred survivors. You watched a seemingly infinite resource vanish before your eyes, a stark and horrifying lesson in the destructive power of westward expansion. With the buffalo gone, you turn to other, more cunning neighbors, the wolf and the coyote. At night, you lie in your sod dye and listen to their calls, the deep, mournful howl of the wolf, the yip-tang, chattering song of the coyote. It's the soundtrack of the wilderness, but it's not a romantic sound to you. It's the sound of a threat. Wolves and coyotes are smart, relentless predators. They will steal your chickens, kill your sheep, and even go after a newborn calf if they see an opportunity. You wage a constant, low-level war against them, with traps, poison, and your rifle. Here's a curious detail about this war. The wolfers. These were men who specialized in poisoning wolves, primarily for the bounty paid on their pelts. They would lace a buffalo carcass with strychnine and then return a few days later to collect the dozens of dead wolves, coyotes, foxes, and anything else unlucky enough to have taken a bite. It was an effective but indiscriminate method of pest control that had a devastating impact on the prairie ecosystem. And then there's the king of the western wilderness, at least in the mountains and forests, the grizzly bear. If you were a trapper, prospector, or homesteader in grizzly country, this animal occupied a special place in your psyche. It was the ultimate predator. A grizzly is not like a black bear. It is huge, fast, and notoriously aggressive. Your single-shot rifle, which seemed so powerful against a deer, suddenly feels like a child's toy. There are countless stories from this era of hunters who wounded a grizzly only to be mauled to death by the enraged animal. Famous mountain men like Hugh Glass became legends, not just for their skills, but for surviving a grizzly attack. His story of being left for dead and crawling 200 miles to safety became a testament to the sheer will to survive in this brutal world. The relationship between settlers and wildlife is a subject that environmental historians continue to explore. Was the rapid extermination of species, like the bison and wolf, an unavoidable consequence of progress? Or was it a conscious choice driven by a mindset that saw the wilderness not as something to coexist with, but as something to be conquered and tamed? The evidence seems to point to the latter. The language used in diaries and letters is often one of warfare. Settlers battled predators. They conquered the land. But there was also a reluctant respect. You learned the habits of the animals. You knew where the deer came to drink at dawn. You could read the tracks of a coyote in the dust. You understood that the hawk circling overhead was a sign of a healthy rabbit population. You were part of this food web, whether you liked it or not. One evening, a small herd of pronghorn antelope, swift and graceful, picks its way across a ridge near your homestead. You watch them, your rifle resting nearby. They are beautiful, a symbol of the wild, untamed spirit of this place. They are also several hundred pounds of potential meat. You raise the rifle, take aim, and then you pause. This is the fundamental conflict of your life in the West. You are both an admirer and a destroyer of the wilderness. You need it to survive, but your very survival means its slow erosion. The choice you make in this moment to pull the trigger or to simply watch them go defines your complicated and often contradictory relationship with the wild creatures who were here long before you and whose world you are irrevocably changing. You built your house, battled the elements, and learned to live with your wild neighbors. You have achieved a state of stability, a fragile equilibrium with the harsh realities of the West. And now, you must face perhaps the most underestimated and insidious enemy of all, the crushing, profound, and dangerous power of boredom. Your life is a cycle of repetitive, strenuous tasks. You wake up, you milk the cow, you feed the chickens, you work the fields, you mend the fence, you cook the same meal you ate yesterday. You go to sleep. The next day, you do it all again. There are no weekends, no holidays, no evenings out. The dramatic, life-threatening events, the blizzard, the rattlesnake bite, the stampede are terrifying, but they are also a break in the routine. It's the endless, grinding sameness of the days in between that can't really wear you down. The landscape itself contributes to this feeling. You stand at your door and look out at a horizon that is a perfect, unbroken circle. The sky is immense. The land is flat and featureless. The scale of it is so vast it can make you feel utterly insignificant. A tiny speck of humanity in a great, empty void. There are no landmarks, no friendly hills or forests. Just the same sea of grass in every direction. This visual monotony seeps into your soul. Your social life is virtually non-existent. Your nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, a distance that requires a significant portion of a day to travel. A visit is a major event, planned for weeks, for long stretches of time. The only human faces you see are those of your own family. The silence is absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind. This is not a peaceful, meditative silence. It is a heavy, oppressive silence that magnifies your own thoughts, your anxieties, your regrets. You crave stimulation. You read the same few books you brought with you over and over until you have them memorized. An old newspaper, weeks out of date, is a precious treasure to be read and reread from front to back, including the advertisements for products you could never hope to buy. A letter from back east is a lifeline to another world. A world of society and news and things happening. You read it until the paper is soft and worn at the creases. Here's a smell, sad detail of frontier life, the desperation for entertainment. When a traveling peddler or a circuit-riding preacher would arrive, it was a cause for celebration, not just for the goods or the sermon, but for the simple fact that it was a new face, a new voice, a break in the crushing loneliness. People would travel for miles to attend a simple barn dance or a community picnic, just to be in the presence of other human beings. This profound isolation and boredom had a name, prairie madness. While we spoke of it in the context of women, it affected men as well. It was a form of severe depression, characterized by long periods of silence, weeping fits, and sometimes acts of sudden, inexplicable violence. The relentless wind, the featureless landscape, and the social isolation could literally drive a person insane. Historians and psychologists still study this phenomenon, debating whether it was a genuine psychological condition brought on by the environment or simply a catch-all term for the misery and despair that was a natural consequence of such a hard life. To combat the boredom, you create your own rituals, your own small points of focus. You might take up whittling, carving intricate figures from a rare piece of wood. You might become an obsessive observer of the weather, keeping a detailed journal of cloud formations and wind direction. You might develop a deep, almost conversational relationship with your animals, talking to them as you go about your chores. These are not just hobbies. They are mental survival strategies, ways to keep your mind occupied and anchored in a world that offers no external stimulation. One of the strangest outlets was the tall tale. In the absence of real news or entertainment, people would entertain each other with wild, fantastically exaggerated stories. They told tales of cowboys who could ride cyclones, of farmers who grew pumpkins so big they could be used as barns, of hunters who shot animals that were a combination of a dozen different creatures. It was a form of folk art born from boredom, a way to make the world around them more interesting and magical than it actually was. Use it on your small porch as the sun sets, painting the vast, empty sky with brilliant colors. It's beautiful, in a stark, intimidating way, but the beauty is tinged with melancholy. Another day is over, a day just like the one before, and very likely just like the one to come. You are not fighting for your life anymore. You are fighting for your sanity. And in the great, silent emptiness of the prairie, that is often the harder battle to win. You find yourself thinking that a good, old-fashioned, terrifying problem like a rattlesnake in the woodpile might be a welcome distraction. At least it would be something different. After weeks, maybe months, of soul-crushing boredom on your homestead, the need for a change of scenery becomes a physical craving. You hitch up the wagon, not for a desperate journey, but for a planned trip to town. You're not just going for supplies. You're going for the social hub, the nerve center, the one place guaranteed to have noise, light, and people, the saloon. In your mind, it's a beacon of civilization. In reality, it's a carefully designed trap, built to separate you from your hard-earned money as efficiently as possible. You push through the swinging doors, and the sensory experience is overwhelming after the silence of the prairie. The air is a thick soup of smells: stale beer, cheap whiskey, sweat, cigar smoke, and the faint, sweet scent of sawdust on the floor. There too soak up spilled drinks and spit. The noise is a dull roar, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the rhythmic thump of a card dealer's hand, and the tinny, slightly out-of-tune plinking of a piano. After the vast, bright emptiness of the plains, the darkness of the saloon feels strangely comforting, like a cave. You step up to the long, polished wooden bar. This is the establishment's main engine of commerce. Behind it, a bartender in a white shirt and arm garters moves with practiced efficiency. HES, not just a server. HES, a psychologist, a bouncer, and a businessman. He knows how to keep the conversations flowing and the drinks pouring. You order a whiskey. Let's talk about that whiskey. It's not the smooth, aged bourbon you might imagine. It's a fiery, raw, and often adulterated concoction. A barrel of cheap whiskey would arrive from the east, and the saloon keeper would stretch it. They would add water, of course, but also things like burnt sugar for color, and even more sinister ingredients like tobacco juice, cayenne pepper, or strychnine to give it a kick. This vile brew was known by 100 names: tarantula juice, coffin varnish, bottled courage. It was designed to get you drunk fast and cheap, and the hangovers were legendary, often described as a form of temporary insanity. You take a sip, it burns all the way down. You order another. At the end of the bar, there might be a free lunch counter. This was a brilliant marketing tactic. The saloon would offer a spread of salty foods, salted fish, pickles, crackers, and cured meats. It was free, but it was designed to do one thing: make you incredibly thirsty. You'd eat the salty food, which would drive you to buy more drinks, which would make you want more salty food. It was a perfect, vicious cycle of consumption. Now, let's look around the room. In the corner, there's the poker game we've already seen can turn deadly. But there are other, quieter ways the saloon is designed to fleece you. You might see a man with a fancy 3-card multi setup, or a shill for a shell game. These weren't just casual gamblers. They were professional grifters who traveled from town to town. Their simple games a masterclass in deception and sleight of hand. They preyed on lonely, bored, and slightly drunk men like you, who thought they were smart enough to beat the game. You're not. And then there are the saloon girls or hurdy-gurdy girls. Let's dispel a myth. The prostitute with a heart of gold is largely a fiction. Many of these women were just that, prostitutes, often trapped in a cycle of debt and despair. But many were also employed as dance-hall girls. Their job was to be conversation partners, to dance with a lonely man, and, most importantly, to encourage them to buy drinks. They would often get a commission on every overpriced, watered-down champagne they could convince a cowboy or a miner to buy for them. It was a business transaction dressed up as flirtation. The very design of the saloon was a subject of intense study and debate. Temperance movements and religious leaders saw it as the literal gateway to hell, a place that destroyed families and fostered every kind of vice. Saloon keepers, on the other hand, argued they were providing a vital community service, a meeting place, a de facto post office, a labor exchange where a man could find work. Historians today try to see it from both sides, recognizing that the saloon was simultaneously a center of community and a place of exploitation and violence. It was a complex, contradictory institution that perfectly reflected the nature of the West itself. A few hours and several glasses of tarantula juice later, the world is starting to feel warm and fuzzy. The piano music sounds beautiful. The man at the end of the bar who wants to show you a simple card trick seems like a friendly fellow. The loneliness that has been your constant companion on the prairie has vanished, replaced by a boisterous, drunken camaraderie. You stumble out of the saloon hours later, blinking in the harsh moonlight. Your head is spinning, and your pocket is significantly lighter. You spent a week's worth of egg money on bad whiskey and lost a few dollars to a card sharp who vanished as soon as your money was gone. The brief, artificial warmth of the saloon has evaporated, leaving you with a familiar feeling of emptiness, now compounded by a throbbing headache and a sense of regret. The saloon didn't cure your loneliness. It just rented you a few hours of oblivion, and the price was steeper than you thought. You've been on your homestead for a few seasons now. You've built a community of sorts, a loose network of other families scattered across the prairie. You might not see your neighbors for weeks at a time, but you know they're there. You rely on each other for help with the harvest, for borrowing tools, for a bit of conversation to break the monotony. But in this fragile world, people have a way of disappearing, and the reasons are often as mundane as they are tragic. One day, you ride over to the Miller place, 5 miles to the east, to return a shovel you borrowed. As you approach, something feels wrong. The homestead is too quiet. There's no smoke coming from the chimney of their sawed die. The chickens are wandering loose, and the milk cow is bellowing uncomfortably. Her udder's full. You call out, "Hello, anybody home?" There's no answer but the rustle of the wind in the tall grass. You push open the heavy wooden door. The inside is cold and still. A half-eaten meal sits on the table, flies buzzing around it. A child's dull eyes on the dirt floor. The Millers are gone. There's no note, no sign of a struggle. They have simply vanished. What happened to them? This is the question that will gnaw at you. And it's a question that often had no clear answer on the frontier. The possibilities are a grim checklist of the West's many dangers. Maybe it was disease. We've talked about cholera, but a dozen other sicknesses could sweep through a family with lethal speed. Diphtheria could choke a child in a single night. Hay fever, what they might have called lung fever or brain fever, could have taken the whole family in the space of a week. In their delirium and weakness, they wouldn't have been able to call for help. Their nearest neighbors, you wouldn't know anything was wrong until it was far too late. They might all be buried in a single, hastily dug grave behind the house, or maybe they just gave up. This was an incredibly common and often forgotten reality of homesteading. The dream of freedom was a lie. The land was not free. It was paid for with backbreaking labor, with crushing loneliness, and with constant, grinding poverty. After another year of drought, or a hailstorm that wiped out their crops, or the death of a child, the Millers might have reached their breaking point. One morning, they simply packed what little they had left into their wagon, abandoned everything else, and headed back east. This reverse migration is a huge part of the story of the West, but it's not one that gets told in the heroic myths. For every successful homesteader, there were many who failed. They were called go-backers, and they were often seen as failures. A stark reminder to everyone else of how easily their own dream could crumble. Here's a small detail that illustrates this: the phenomenon of starving out. This was the term for being forced to abandon a claim due to lack of food. A family might hold on through a brutal winter, their supplies dwindling, hoping for an early spring. But if spring came late, or if their winter store's worm is calculated, they faced a stark choice: stay and starve, or leave. They would walk away from their home, their land, their entire investment, just to survive. And then there's the darker, more violent possibility. While the threat of attack was often exaggerated, it was real. We think of organized raids, but the danger could be smaller scale. A pair of desperate drifters, wanted men passing through the territory, could have seen the isolated homestead as an easy target. The violence would have been swift and brutal. Over in a matter of minutes, the men would have taken what little of value there was: a horse, a gun, a sack of flour, and disappeared back into the vastness of the wilderness, leaving no trace but silence. Historians who study county records and personal diaries from this period are constantly confronted with these mysteries. A family is listed in a census one year and is gone the next, with no recordable and sale or a death certificate. They simply evaporate from the historical record. This is a point of ongoing academic inquiry. How do you account for these disappearances? How do you tell the story of people who left no story behind? It highlights the immense difficulty of chronicling the lives of the poor and the transient in this era. You stand in the silent, empty house of your neighbors. The silence is profound. It's the silence of a failed dream. You don't know if you should be sad for them or afraid for yourself. Their disappearance is a stark reminder of your own vulnerability. You are just as isolated, just as susceptible to disease, despair, and violence. You do the neighborly thing. You milk their cow, you feed their chickens, and you secure the door to their empty home. You'll take their animals back to your own homestead for now. Maybe the Millers will come back, but as you ride away, you look back at the quiet sod die, slowly being reclaimed by the prairie grass, and you know they won't. They are now just another ghost on this vast, indifferent landscape, their story lost to the wind. You've seen firsthand how quickly life can be extinguished in the West by disease, by accident, by a simple loss of hope. In a world with so few reliable solutions, people don't just rely on the doctor with his mercury pills or the sheriff with his tin star. They turn to a deeper, older source of comfort and control: superstition and folk remedies. This is a world steeped in beliefs that straddle the line between medicine, magic, and pure, unadulterated nonsense. Let's go back to that rattlesnake bite. The doctor's official advice was useless. So what do you try instead? You turn to folklore. A very common folk belief was that you could cure a snake bite with a mad stone. A mad stone was a calcified hairball, usually taken from the stomach of a deer or another sea-chewing animal. It was believed to have a magical drawing power. You would press the stone against the wound, and it would supposedly stick there, sucking out the venom. When it was saturated, it would fall off. You'd then soak it in milk to cleanse it, and reapply it until it no longer stuck, a sign that all the poison was gone. Madstones were incredibly valuable and rare. A family or a town that owned one was considered blessed. People would travel for days and pay a considerable fee to use it. Does it work? Absolutely not. It has no scientific basis whatsoever. And yet, the belief was unshakable. Why? Because sometimes, people who used it survived. They were likely bitten by a non-venomous snake, or it was a dry bite where the rattlesnake didn't inject any venom. But their survival was attributed to the magic of the stone, reinforcing the belief. Historians and folklorists are fascinated by madstones, as they represent a perfect intersection of hope, desperation, and the human need to find patterns where none exist. Illness in general was a breeding ground for superstition. With no understanding of germ theory, sickness was often seen as the result of a curse, bad air miasma, or even a moral failing. To counter these invisible forces, you would employ a variety of charms and rituals. A small bag of foul-smelling as a feather worn around the neck was thought to ward off disease. Planting a certain type of herb by your doorway could prevent evil spirits from entering. Teething was a particularly dangerous time for infants, with high rates of fever and mortality, often due to associated diarrheal diseases. To help a teething baby, people would use all sorts of remedies. One of the more bizarre ones was to tie a live mole's foot in a bag around the baby's neck. Another was to have the baby chew on a necklace made of beads carved from briny root. These weren't just quirky traditions. They were desperate attempts to protect a child in an age of staggering infant mortality. Let's talk about childbirth again. In the absence of a doctor, the process was managed by women, relying on a body of knowledge passed down through generations. Some of it was practical and helpful massages, certain positions to ease labor, but much of it was pure superstition. To speed up a difficult labor, they might unlock every lock and open every drawer and door in the house. The symbolic magic intended to open the womb. They might fire a gun over the house to scare the baby out. It sounds absurd, but in a moment of life or death crisis, you'll try anything. The weather, that other great and unpredictable force, was also subject to a rich tapestry of folklore. People had countless methods for predicting the weather, passed down from their European ancestors. The thickness of a pig's spleen, the stripes on a woolly bear caterpillar, or the way a rooster crowed could all be interpreted as signs of the coming winter's severity. Some of these, like red sky at night, sailors' delight, have a kernel of scientific truth to them. Most were simply tradition. The academic debate over the efficacy of folk meteorology is ongoing. Was it a genuinely useful set of observations, or just a comforting illusion of control over the chaotic climate? Even the act of farming was governed by superstition. You would plant your crops according to the phases of the moon. Root vegetables were to be planted during the dark of the moon, while crops that grew above ground, like corn, should be planted as the moon was waxing. This practice, known as lunar farming, is ancient and still has its believers today. For you, a homesteader whose entire survival depends on a good harvest, it was just a tradition. It was a sacred rule you wouldn't dare break. You live in a world that is, on the one hand, brutally practical and, on the other, deeply magical. You will check your rifle and your ammunition with meticulous care, and then refuse to start a journey on a Friday because it's bad luck. You will dig an irrigation ditch with scientific precision, and then plant your seeds according to a celestial body 250,000 miles away. This blend of pragmatism and superstition isn't a contradiction. It's a coping mechanism. It's how you make sense of a world that is random, dangerous, and indifferent to your survival. When reason and hard work fail you, you turn to the comforting, if illusory, power of magic. We've talked about the grand dangers and the invisible threats, but let's zoom in on something so fundamental, so pervasive, that it was almost completely taken for granted by the people living through it. The overwhelming lack of sanitation. You are living in a world that, to modern sensibilities, is unimaginably filthy. The romantic, sepia-toned images of the West hide a reality that was defined by dirt, grime, and a constant, stomach-turning assault on the senses. Let's start with your personal hygiene. Water is a precious commodity, often hauled by hand from a distance, and likely contaminated source. It's used for drinking and cooking first. Bathing is a rare luxury, not a daily routine. A full body bath might happen once a month. If you're really lucky, the whole family would use the same tub of lukewarm, scummy water, starting with the father and working down to the youngest child. For daily cleaning, you might manage a quick splash of water on your face and hands from a basin. Your clothes are worn for days, even weeks, on end. Laundry is a item and tools. All-day task, involving boiling water over an open fire and scrubbing clothes by hand with harsh, lye-based soap. In this context, the clean, crisp outfits of Hollywood cowboys are a laughable fantasy. Everyone and everything was coated in a permanent layer of dust and sweat. Now let's step outside your sawed-ironed into town. The streets are not paved. They are rivers of dirt that turn into thick, boot-sucking mud whenever it rains. But it's not just dirt. The streets are the town's communal garbage disposal. People toss their household waste food scraps, broken pottery, old rags right out the door. The local butcher shop throws animal entrails into the alley. The blacksmith discards piles of coal ash and slag. There is no municipal garbage collection. The waste just piles up, rotting in the sun. And then there's the manure. Every horse, mule, and ox in town is a living, breathing manure factory, producing upwards of 20 pounds of waste per day. This is deposited directly onto the street, where it's ground into the dust by wagon wheels and foot traffic. In the summer, it dries into a fine, foul-smelling powder that is kicked up with every gust of wind, coating your clothes, your food, and your lungs. In the winter, it freezes into treacherous, slippery mounds. In the spring, it thaws into a soupy, stinking quagmire. One of the forgotten occupations of the era was the street arrow, often a young boy who would dart into the street to scoop up fresh manure to sell as fertilizer. Where do you go to the bathroom? The outhouse, or privy, is the height of sanitary technology. It's a small wooden shack built over a deep hole in the ground. It's hot, it's swarming with flies, and the smell is indescribable. These are often placed close to the family well, creating a perfect, closed-loop system for contaminating the drinking water with fecal bacteria, leading directly to the cholera and dysentery we've already discussed. In the saloons and boarding houses of a boomtown, the outhouses would be overflowing pits of filth, a public health nightmare waiting to happen. Here's a small, stomach-churning detail. The spitting, chewing tobacco was incredibly common, and men would spit the brown, stringy juice constantly to maintain a semblance of civility indoors. Public places like saloons, hotels, and even courthouses would have spit a nest large brass or ceramic pots filled with sand or sawdust. They were rarely clean, overflowing with a vile slurry of tobacco spit, and men often missed. The floors around them were permanently stained and sticky. The connection between this pervasive filth and the diseases that ravaged the population was not understood. The prevailing miasma theory held that disease was caused by bad smells or foul air. This was entirely wrong. Places that smell bad were often, in fact, unsanitary and dangerous, but it missed the crucial role of germs. So, people might try to combat disease by burning patent-smelling herbs or holding a scented handkerchief to their nose, all while drinking water teeming with typhoid bacteria. Historians who specialize in the urban history of the West are constantly piecing together this sensory world from municipal records and personal accounts. There are ongoing debates about when and why towns began to invest in public sanitation. Was it driven by a scientific understanding of disease, or by a more middle-class desire for civic pride and order, to make their rough frontier towns look more like the civilized cities back east? The evidence suggests it was often the latter. Aesthetics and social status were powerful motivators. You stand in the middle of a bustling frontier street. The visual chaos is one thing, but the sensory experience is a full-body assault. The smell of rotting garbage, manure, and unwashed bodies hangs heavy in the air. The noise of wagon wheels, shouting men, and barking dogs is constant. The dust gets in your eyes, your mouth, your nose. You came to the West seeking a clean slate, a fresh start in a pristine wilderness. The irony is that you now live in a level of filth that would have been shocking in the crowded tenement slums of the cities you left behind. This, in its own way, is the true Wild West, a world untamed by even the most basic concepts of hygiene. You've lived through the grim and gritty reality. You've seen death from disease, pointless violence, and sheer despair. You know that life in the West is mostly a story of quiet, anonymous struggle. But now, something strange starts to happen. The stories of your life, and the lives of those around you, are beginning to change in the telling. The messy, brutal, and oft unboring reality is being polished, simplified, and transformed into something it never was. A legend you are witnessing, in real time, the birth of the myth of the Wild West. It starts small. Remember that drunken, ugly shooting in the saloon? The one that was over in 5 seconds and left a man bleeding on the floor over a 50-cent card game. A few weeks later, you overhear a man in the general store telling the story to a newcomer. But in his version, the two men weren't drunkards. They were rival gunslingers. It was too clumsy, close-range shooting. It was a lightning-fast draw. The argument wasn't over a card game. It was over a woman's honor. The grimy, pathetic event has been given a narrative, a structure, a meaning it never had. It's becoming a good story. This process is supercharged by a new phenomenon from back east. The dime novel, Days War Cheap, sensationalized paperback books, the 19th century equivalent of action movies. Writers who had never been west of the Mississippi began churning out incredible tales of heroic cowboys, noble savages, and dastardly villains. They took the names of real people figures like Buffalo Bill Cody, Wild Bill Hickok, or Jesse James and stripped them of all their human complexity. Wild Bill Hickok, in reality, was a complex and often morose man who worked as a lawman, a gambler, and a scout. He was certainly a skilled gunman, but many of his documented killings were messy, ambiguous affairs. In the dime novels, he becomes an infallible hero of justice, a knight of the plains who single-handedly tames lawless towns with his twin revolvers. You, who may have seen the real Hickok squinting at a hand of cards, know the reality was far more complicated. Even the outlaws get a makeover. A brutal, violent gang of bank robbers like the James Younger gang is transformed into a band of Robin Hoods, stealing from the rich in this case, the hated railroad companies and banks, and fighting for the common man. The fact that they were ruthless killers who murdered innocent clerks and bystanders is conveniently omitted from the narrative. People wanted to believe in these heroes and anti-heroes, because it made the chaotic and often unjust world around them seem more exciting and meaningful. Here's a fascinating detail about this myth-making process. The people themselves started to participate in it. Buffalo Bill Cody was a genuine plainsman, a hunter, a scout, a rider for the Pony Express. But his real genius was in marketing. He created Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a traveling show that was part circus, part historical reenactment. It featured real cowboys, real Native Americans, including, for a time, the Great Laka Cow Eater Sitting Bull, and demonstrations of riding, roping, and shooting. But it was theater. The stagecoach holdups were choreographed. The Indian attacks were staged battles where the cowboys always won. Cody presented a simplified, thrilling, and hugely popular version of the West to audiences in America and Europe, who consumed it eagerly. He was just telling the myth. He was selling it. Historians are still untangling the complex relationship between the real West and its myth. It's a classic chicken and egg debate. Did the dime novels simply reflect a reality that was already dramatic, or did the myths themselves influence how people in the West behave, encouraging them to live up to the larger-than-life person as being created for them? The answer is likely both. A young cowboy might treat a dime novel and then try to emulate the swagger and tough talk of its hero, creating a feedback loop where life imitates art. You see this happening all around you. That quiet, unassuming sheriff in your town, After a story about him runs in a regional newspaper, he starts to walk a little taller, to talk a little tougher. He is performing the role of frontier sheriff that has been written for him. The lines between who he is and who people think he is begin to blur. You are living in a moment of profound historical transformation. The frontier, as a real place of hardship and struggle, is starting to fade. As the buffalo disappear and the land is carved up into farms and ranches, the Wild West is dying. But in its place, a new, more powerful West is being born, a West of the imagination. It's a cleaner, simpler, more exciting world. It's a world where all the conflicts are clear-cut, all the heroes are handsome, and all the gunfights are noble. You, who know the truth of filth, the fear, the boredom might find this process strained, even infuriating. Your struggles and the quiet tragedies of your neighbors are being erased, replaced by a cheap, thrilling fantasy. But you also understand its appeal. The myth is easier to live with than the reality. It's a better story, and you realize, with a sense of resignation, that it's the story that will survive, long after your sod house has crumbled back into the earth and your name is forgotten. The legend of the Wild West will live on. For years, your life has been governed by the slow, organic rhythms of the prairie. The speed of your world is the speed of a walking ox, about 2 miles an hour. The distances between towns, between your homestead and the world you left behind, are immense, measured in weeks and months of arduous travel. Then, one day, you hear a new sound on the horizon. It's not the howl of a wolf or the rumble of thunder. It's a rhythmic sea huffing, a metallic clang, and a high, piercing whistle that slices through the silence of the plains. The railroad is coming. This isn't just a new form of transportation. It is a revolution, an iron earthquake that will shatter your world and rebuild it in a completely new image. The arrival of the Transcontinental Railroad is the single most transformative event in the history of the American West. At first, it's a source of work and excitement. The construction crews move across the landscape like an army. They are a rough, brawling, and diverse collection of men, Irish immigrants, Chinese laborers, Civil War veterans, freed slaves. They lay the track with breathtaking speed. Their synchronized movements a marvel of brute force engineering. They live in temporary, mobile towns called Hell on Wheels, notorious for their violence, gambling, and vice. These towns spring up at the end of the track line, rage for a few months, and then pack up and move on, leaving behind a trail of empty bottles and discarded dreams. You watch as the two great lines, the Union Pacific building from the east and the Central Pacific from the west, race towards each other. Their progress a national obsession. The government, in its eagerness to unite the country, has granted the railroad companies vast swaths of land on either side of the tracks. This is a point of huge controversy, and historians still debate the consequences of this massive corporate giveaway. Was it a necessary incentive to build a vital piece of infrastructure? Or was it a colossal act of crony capitalism that enriched a few powerful men at the expense of the public? For you, a homesteader, the immediate effects are a mix of blessing and curse. Suddenly, the town that was a 3-day wagon ride away is now just a few hours' journey. You can sell your crops to a national market, no longer at the mercy of the local grain merchant. You can buy manufactured goods from the east, a new steel plow, a cast iron stove, glass windows that were once unimaginable luxuries. Your isolation is shattered. You are now connected to the rest of the country by a ribbon of steel, but this new connection comes at a price. The railroad brings people, thousands of them. The empty lands around you are quickly settled. The open range, where your cattle once grazed freely, is now being carved up and fenced in with a new invention called barbed wire. This leads to bitter conflicts, the famous range wars, between the established cattle ranchers who depended on the open range and the new farmers, or nesters, who were fencing it off. The railroad also changes the very nature of time. Before, every town operated on its own local. Sometime, noon was when the sun was highest in the sky. But a train schedule can't function like that. To keep the trains from crashing into each other, the railroad companies created a new, standardized system of time zones. It was a radical idea that was initially resisted by many. Your life is no longer governed by the sun, but by the clock in the station master's office. You are now living in a synchronized, industrialized world. Here's a small detail that shows the railroad's profound cultural impact. The company actively promoted settlement to sell off its vast land grants. They sent agents to Europe, printing glossy pamphlets in dozens of languages, promising a veritable Garden of Eden. They offered cheap home seeker tickets, bringing wave after wave of new immigrants from Germany, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe directly to the prairies of Nebraska and the Dakotas. Your once familiar community of mostly Anglo-American neighbors is now a diverse patchwork of different languages, cultures, and religions, all brought together by the Iron Horse. And, of course, the railroad is the final nail in the coffin for the wild, untamed West you once knew. It solidifies the military's control over the plains, making it easier to move troops and supplies, effectively ending the last vestiges of Native American resistance. It accelerates the slaughter of the buffalo, as hunters can now easily ship the hides back east. The wilderness that once seemed so vast and unconquerable is now gridded, mapped, and mastered by the machine. You stand on the small wooden platform of your local depot, the ground still vibrating from a passing train. The air smells of coal smoke. A few years ago, this spot was just empty prairie. Now, it's a bustling hub of commerce and travel. You can buy a ticket and be in Chicago in 2 days. The world has shrunk. The adventure, the struggle, the terrifying freedom of the frontier, it's all being replaced by something more orderly, more predictable, and more modern. You feel a sense of wonder, but also a profound sense of loss. The railroad has brought you civilization, but it has killed the wilderness you came here to find. Decades have passed. Your hands are gnarled. Your back is permanently stooped. And your face is a road map of wrinkles carved by sun and worry. You are a survivor. You've outlasted the droughts, the blizzards, the diseases, and the crushing loneliness. Your sod house has been replaced by a proper wooden farmhouse with glass windows. The railroad runs through the nearby town, which now has a church, a school, and a permanent courthouse. You have, by all accounts, succeeded. You have tamed a piece of the West. But now, in the quiet evenings of your old age, you are forced to confront the cost of that survival. The physical toll is undeniable. Your body is a wreck. Years of back-breaking labor lifting sod bricks, plowing the tough prairie soil, hauling water have left you with chronic aches and pains that will never go away. You might have a persistent cough from years of breathing in dust and smoke. Your hearing might be shot from the proximity to firearms. You look at your spouse, and you see the same story written on their body. The West has taken its payment in flesh and bone, but the physical scars are nothing compared to the ones you carry on the inside. You are a graduate of a brutal school of loss. You think of the children you buried on the trail, victims of cholera or a river crossing. You remember the neighbors who simply vanished, their homesteads swallowed by the prairie. You recall the friends who died in pointless, drunken violence or from a simple, infected scratch. You are surrounded by ghosts. Every corner of your land holds a memory of someone or something that was lost. This profound, ungrieved sorrow is a constant, quiet companion. The very skills that allowed you to survive are now becoming obsolete. Your ability to read the weather in the clouds, to track an animal for miles, to find water in a drought, and these were the skills of a pioneer. But in this new, more civilized West, they are becoming folk knowledge, quaint stories to tell your grandchildren, who live in a world of timetables and telegrams. The world has moved on, and you feel like a relic from a bygone era. You attend a town meeting about a new irrigation project. The young men in suits, engineers and lawyers from back east, talk about financing and water rights in cubic feet per second. They speak a language you don't understand. You, who spent years desperately digging your own ditches by hand, are now being told by outsiders how to manage your own water. There's a resentment that simmers beneath the surface, a feeling that the very people who are now profiting from the West have no understanding of what it took to build it. This tension between the old West of the pioneers and the new West of corporate interests is a defining feature of this period, and historians still trace the roots of many modern political debates back to this fundamental conflict. Here's a small, poignant detail of this transition. You might see one of the new, popular Wild West shows when it comes to a nearby city. You watch actors dressed in pristine, fringed buckskin perform a sanitized, choreographed version of your life. They portray gunfights as noble duels on Indian attacks, as thrilling spectacles. The audience cheers and use it there, in the dark, feeling a strange mix of pride and disgust. They are celebrating a myth, a lie. They have no concept of the filth, the fear, the grinding reality of it all. Is this what your life has been reduced to? Cheap entertainment. The psychological cost of survival is a topic that historians and psychologists have increasingly focused on. What is the long-term impact of living in a state of constant, low-level fear? How does the experience of extreme hardship and loss shape a person's worldview? Many survivors developed a unique psychological armor of stoicism, a reluctance to show emotion, a deep-seated fatalism. They were tough, yes, but it was a brittle toughness, forged in trauma. They were not necessarily happy. They were just not dead. You sit on your porch, looking out over your fields of wheat, shimmering in the setting sun. It's a peaceful scene. It is the very picture of the dream that brought you here so long ago. You own this land. You are a success. But as you look at it, you don't just see the wheat. You see the ghosts of the buffalo that once roamed here. You see the spot where your firstborn son was buried. You see the years of your own youth, burned away under the relentless sun. You survived, but you have to ask yourself, was it worth it? The answer is not a simple yes or no. It's a question that hangs in the quiet evening air, as complex and as vast as the western sky itself. It's the final, quiet price of being a conquerable, and that was never truly yours to conquer. You are old now, truly old. You've seen the world change from the speed of an ox to the speed of a steam locomotive. You sit on your porch, not out of necessity, but out of habit. Your days of hard labor are over. The farm is managed by your children, or perhaps it's been sold off. The land now, part of a much larger, more corporate enterprise. Your life has narrowed to this porch, this chair, and the long, slow parade of your memories. And as you near the end of your own story, you find yourself thinking about how stories end. You think about death. In the stories your grandchildren read, the dime novels and the sanitized histories, death in the West is a dramatic, almost glorious affair. It's a gunfighter going down in a blaze of glory in a dusty street. It's a soldier making a heroic last stand against overwhelming odds. It's dying with your boots on, a phrase that lends a certain rugged dignity to the act of expiring. This is the death that gets a name, a legend, a place in a cemetery with a sign that reads Boot Hill. It's the death that matters, the death that becomes part of the myth. But you know the truth. You are a curator of a museum of forgotten deaths, the quiet and dignified and overwhelmingly common endings that never make it into the stories. The most profound and lasting lesson the West has taught you is this: most deaths were not heroic tragedies. They were just pathetic, miserable, and swiftly forgotten events. You remember the family in the wagon next to yours on the trail, the one that was struck by cholera. You remember the father, a strong, proud man, reduced to a whimpering, dehydrated husk in a matter of hours, his body unceremoniously wrapped in a blanket and buried in a shallow grave that was intentionally trampled by the wagons to hide it from wolves. There was no glory in that death. It was just a biological process, horrifying in its speed and indignity. You remember the young cowboy who worked for a neighboring ranch. He was shot in a duel. He was kicked in the head by his spooked horse while trying to fix a broken harness. He died instantly. He was buried in a corner of the pasture, his grave marked by a simple wooden cross that you know rotted and fell over within a decade. His name is already forgotten. His final resting place now just another patch of anonymous prairie. For every one lawman shot in the line of duty, you know there were 100 homesteaders who died of something as mundane as a toothache. An abscessed tooth, left untreated, could lead to a systemic infection, a raging fever, and a slow, agonizing death. It's so ridiculous, almost insulting way to die. But it was real. Historians are still trying to quantify this, sifting through coroner's reports and old letters to build a truer picture of mortality, to show that the real killers of the West weren't bullets, but bacteria, accidents, and exposure. They debate the extent to which the popular media of the time intentionally crafted a hierarchy of death, valuing the violent and ignoring the mundane, thereby shaping the nation's memory of the frontier experience. You think of the women who died in childbirth, their screams muffled by the thick odd walls of their home, their passing marked only by a new graven husband, left with a handful of motherless children. Their sacrifice was as great as any soldier, but no one wrote dime novels about them. Their deaths were considered a private tragedy, a part of life, not a part of history. The great, open landscape of the West, which once seemed to you a symbol of endless possibility, now feels like something else entirely. It feels like a vast, unmarked cemetery. Every river bend holds the ghosts of those who drowned. Every snow-covered field holds the memory of someone who froze. Every patch of land that was once a homestead holds the echo of a family that simply didn't make it. The heroic deaths of the myth are the rare, glittering exceptions. The quiet, forgotten deaths are the rule. They are the foundation upon which the West was built. You look towards the town cemetery, the one with the carved granite headstones and the neat iron fence. You know you will rest there soon. You will have a stone with your name and your dates carved into it. You will be remembered, at least for a generation or two, and you realize that this, more than the land, more than the house, is your final, unearned luxury, to be given a death with a name. It's a privilege denied to the vast, silent majority of those who came west with you. The countless souls whose stories ended quietly and whose only monument is the vast, indifferent land itself.